introduction, Mr. Paul. Appreciate it. So, I am Melissa Lampe. I am the president of the Watertown Historical Society. I've been in this role now for 11 years, and I have some of my board colleagues in the audience tonight, so thank you everyone for being here. As I give this talk, I want to make sure everyone knows that you are free to ask questions, and I have a feeling there will be some people in this room who have a lot to add to the presentation tonight just through their own histories. I did a lot of this research on the wonderful Watertown Historical Society website. Much of the information is taken from old articles. There are some things we could be wrong about, so we will want to be corrected so we can correct that for the official record on our website if needed. So we are recording this tonight so we can share it with all the school children in the art classes in the school district. So if you would like to speak, I am going to bring the microphone to you to make sure that the video and audio picks it up clearly. Okay. So I'm happy to present Watertown, where history takes flight. Okay, so why is Watertown High School's mascot the Gosling? Is it because of our proximity to the Rock River? Is it because geese are just cute as babies? It's not that either. It's because, allegedly, adult fattened goose livers are tasty. So stuffed geese, a German tradition brought to Watertown. So starting around 1880, Watertown made a name for itself in large, wealthy cities and as far away as Europe for its delicious Watertown stuffed goose. Germans who immigrated to Watertown brought with them the tradition of noodling, or stuffing geese, to develop oversized, fatty livers that were considered a delicacy in many high-end restaurants, on ocean liners, and on cross-country passenger trains. The fattened goose liver was known as, and I'm gonna mispronounce this, pâté foie gras. That sound right? Does anyone know different? Okay, we're gonna go with it. Gras. To grow the enlarged liver, geese on family farms across Watertown and in the countryside were force-fed noodles, which were essentially a stringy mixture of barley, rye, and wheat that was inserted into the throats of geese multiple times a day. The process would typically begin around November 1st to ensure the geese, and especially the liver pâté, would be ready in time for Christmas dinner. Typically, only males were used for stuffing because they were considered hardier than the females. On the screen, you will see a Watertown Centennial brochure from 1936, of course, home of the famous Watertown goose. So here are some images of what the pâté may look like if you were to order it in a restaurant today. Has anyone in the room had it? Carla has, okay. Is it good? Okay. What does it taste like? Can you explain?
Liver products or liver sausage, it doesn't have the spices of that. It's very creamy. Generally, you put it on a cracker or, as they showed there, a piece of thin pumpernickel bread. I think it's delicious, but no one else in my family goes along.
All right, thank you. Okay, so here is an advertisement from F.C. Hartwig, a local shipper of farm produce, promoting the famous Watertown stuffed goose. This image shows racks of processed geese hanging on the left side. A live goose is featured prominently in the center, and there's also imagery of farm and fresh eggs, seeds, grains, and other things that you would use on your farm. So, note the picture on the bottom. I'm sure a lot of people in this room recognize this house. It's on Country Lane off of Mary Knoll. So that is the original Hartwig farmstead, built around 1860. That home was originally part of a 600-acre farm, and that family had almost a dozen children. Okay, the first mention of a goose being Watertown High School's mascot appears in the 1913 Orbit yearbook. So the Orbit was the name of our high school yearbook for decades and still continues to be, although the yearbooks now have different themes each year. So prior to this time and for several years after, our sports teams were referred to as the Blue and Whites. The first mention of our team actually being called the Goslings occurs in the 1924 orbit. And I have a copy of that yearbook here with us tonight if you would like to very carefully take a look after the meeting. And did you know that the Katy Street Bridge, built in the 1930s, actually features the geese in its metal ironwork?
Yep.
Are there any other bridges in town that still retain that, or did at one time? Does anyone know?
Division Street.
Division Street Bridge. Are they still there?
Yep.
Yep, okay, so Division Street and Katy Street, thank you. And the little image on the bottom shows toward the back of the yearbook. It's just that little simple picture on a page all by itself. So let's take a moment to look back at Watertown's earlier high school buildings. We have the first high school in the upper left corner that was completed in 1883. That stood on Western Avenue where Trinity St. Luke's School now stands. When the building beneath it was completed in 1897, the building on top became Douglas School. So the building on the bottom was our high school for many, many years, until this one was completed around 1918. And of course, we all know this one was located on South 8th Street on the site of the present YMCA. And that started being taken down, it was shortly before I moved here, so in the early 2000s. Does that seem right? People? Yep. Okay. So while we are on the topic of past high school buildings, as I was looking through the yearbooks, looking for that first mention of the name the Goslings, I thought this was interesting. And especially because I designed this talk mainly for students in our school district. And a lot of them attend football games on Landsberg Field, but do they know the history? They probably do not. So many of you may remember Mr. Landsberg, but he was an educator in Watertown for 30 years. He taught art at Riverside Middle School. So back to the geese. So the art of noodling geese, which many years ago put Watertown on the map, had faded out of the picture by the late 1960s. The last family in Watertown to carry on this practice was Mr. and Mrs. Fred Rumler of 727 North Church Street. I know people in this room knew them, right?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So the principal reason for stopping the process altogether was that the federal government would no longer permit interstate shipment of birds unless a government inspector was present when they were slaughtered. Since there was never a central slaughtering point for stuffed geese in Watertown, each farm family did this on their own on their farms. The raising and preparing of the stuffed geese for market, they did their own slaughtering, and it would have been possible to engage an inspector to visit each of these farms. However, the decline began to set in prior to that time because preparing such geese for market entailed long hours of tedious work. Each year, fewer and fewer farmers engaged in raising them, and 3 to 4 generations ago, many families were still willing to put in the time and effort, but as their children grew up and either left the farms or took over the farms, most were no longer willing to do such work. So I made note, this was interesting from the archives of the Historical Society, that the William Schmidt family, which was located on a farm southwest of Watertown, was also active in stuffing geese. 1 year alone, 130 geese were stuffed by the Schmidts. The Schmidts practiced the art of goose noodling for 30 years. These geese in later years were prepared by their 3 sons, Edwin, Erwin, and Rudolph. Interesting to hear the names and how names are cyclical in trend. Okay, so I brought with me Watertown's original goose right here. So in order to preserve this interesting ethnic contribution to Watertown's history, the Watertown Arts Council in 1969 sponsored the preparation of a display for the Pioneer Barn on the grounds of the Octagon House with an accompanying history of a once thriving and nationally known industry. So with the cooperation of Fred Rumler, then the city's only remaining resident with the knowledge of this method used in preparing the geese for market, and Walter Pelzer, who was a Milwaukee Museum taxidermist, a fine African Toulouse goose was noodled and mounted for presentation to the Historical Society. So this is that goose. This goose is from 1969, and he does live in our barn at the Historical Society. He is on display with a model of what a typical sized goose liver should look like, okay? And then this is what an enlarged goose liver looks like after it's been noodled. These are not real, just yes. And typically, a noodled goose would weigh about 38 pounds. And so pictured here is Mrs. Ralph Ebert of the Arts Council and Gladys Mullart of the Watertown Historical Society, who some people may remember both of these women. Okay, so an article that accompanied this presentation of the goose states, and I will read it, for people who don't know the true story of why our mascot is the gosling, many might ask, what is fierce and competitive about a baby goose? Well, these creatures are tenacious and they fearlessly take on any foe. Inside their bills are sharp little teeth that serve well in defending themselves. Gosling athletes do well to model this never give up attitude against their fierce competition. And so the familiar drawing of the gosling that we all know today has had a couple different variations, but it was first created by former art teacher James Pyshinsky in 1961. He recently passed away on August 21st at age 94 years old. He taught art at Riverside Middle School for 32 years. Okay, so I had to include this picture. Does anyone know what's happening here? You guess? It's a goose that's being coy. Do you guys get it? Because my high schoolers just looked at me really, really blank. This picture was taken a couple of weeks ago at the Missouri Botanical Gardens. We had gone down to take my daughter to see Billy Joel, of all people, in concert. She loved it. But they have a little feeding station in a pond for the fish, but the ducks and the geese get in on it, so I had to capture that shot and share it tonight. So are there any questions that I can answer, or is there any insight anyone would like to share about the goose noodling before we move on to another topic? Yes, I'm going to bring you the microphone.
About the old high school on Western Avenue, I think that became Webster, because the old Douglas is on Lincoln Street, was on Lincoln Street, and it was torn down. There are two houses there now.
Okay. And Lyle.
I think another reason why the goose industry died is because there were a lot of humane societies that were against the practice. Because basically what it does is it causes cirrhosis of the liver to the geese.
Yeah, and that is something I have read too in some of the research, that there were a lot of people who were beginning to feel that the practice was inhumane and should no longer continue.
But it is good. It tastes good.
It is good.
Yes.
So I was just gonna mention about the Gosling logo. So there's a Gosling logo that's in the cafeteria at the new high school. It's up on the wall. And that used to be at the old high school in the newer part. And that was stolen
Okay.
many years ago. You know, I don't know how people got around to stealing it off that wall. I mean, it was, 20 feet up. But anyway, if I recall right, somebody was going down Highway 19 and saw that Gosling mascot against somebody's barn. And somehow it was returned. And I remember when David's Paint Store was still doing cars and trucks, it was down there and they repainted it and then it was returned back to the school.
Okay.
It was, kind of the dumpy looking mascot, not the one with the chestnut.
Ferocious one.
Oh, that's a great story. Anything else anyone wants to add toward the history of why we are the Goslings, or anything regarding the noodling of geese? Yep. Oh, yeah, Sandy.
This is kind of dumb. I used to work at the high school. I was a secretary, Bill, and one year the team went to the state tournament, and so there were a lot of Milwaukee Journal, all those kind of big newspapers were calling to, and they wanted to know why we were called the Goslings. And so of course I was the candidate because I kept talking about the Goslings and we should be proud of them. And I would tell him the story about noodling geese. And he said, well, one of them said, well, why didn't you just call them the goose team? I said, would you like to be on the goose team? And they finally understood.
Very good, thank you. And I'm trying to think back, when I was talking about Arnold Landsberg, I may have incidentally said he's an art teacher. If I did, I'm not quite sure if that's correct.
No, gym teacher.
Thank you. Did I say art teacher? If I did, he's a gym teacher. Okay, thank you. So when I was preparing this talk for students in the high school, I thought about what else would I like them to know about Watertown history to help inspire them to come up with ideas to decorate their geese. So I thought about it's important to give them a little bit of history information, and then I wanted to talk about some places in the city that they'd be familiar with to make it interesting to them. So as always, I want to start with discussion about Timothy Johnson, who was the first Yankee settler, white settler, to arrive in Watertown. He came here in 1836. And so he also had established Johnson Creek, which continues to bear his name. So when he had started the founding of Watertown, there were maybe 10 bachelor men here the first couple of years. This area was known as Johnson's Rapids. And then on the right picture here is a monument that still exists out by the former Bethesda campus, now by the Collective, that shows the site of his first log cabin in Watertown. Why is Watertown called Watertown? So we ask this question a lot when we give tours at the Octagon House. People assume it's because of the Rock River that meanders through the city. It's actually because we had a large influx of settlers coming from Watertown, New York, Jefferson County, New York, and they came and settled in Watertown. And by the time we incorporated as a city in 1853, our name had been established as Watertown. Everyone, I'm sure, is familiar with these important buildings. I won't ask for a show of hands of who has been there, because I'm going to assume everyone in this room has toured the Octagon House and our first kindergarten. But of course, John Richards is the builder of the Octagon House. He arrived in Watertown just a year after Timothy Johnson in 1837. And again, there's not a whole lot happening here for settlement at that time. Just a bunch of bachelor men trying to stake a claim in the community and try to develop some industry. So Watertown was very, very attractive, though, to early settlers because of the Rock River. Where it enters the city to where it leaves it, it has an elevation drop of about 20 to 25 feet, which made it very attractive for harnessing mill power. So John Richards had come to Watertown. He had built a cabin on the east side of the Rock River. He eventually went on to buy about 100 acres of land, which is the area surrounding the present-day Octagon House. In 1841, he returned to Massachusetts, where he came from, because he left his sweetheart behind. And he had promised Eliza Forbes, who was then a rather well-to-do young lady in Massachusetts, that if she would come with him to the Pioneer West, that he promised he would build her the finest home his money could build. And he was true to his word. It just took a little time. They returned here in 1841. This house wasn't completed to 1854, and they had 7 of their 8 children in that little cabin on the east side of the Rock River. And for those of you who may not know, the first kindergarten project, we're actually doing an addition. We're building an addition onto the building right now. We're creating an interactive classroom, which will be very exciting, and that will be open in time for our reopening next May. Okay, so when thinking about some of the places that the high school students would be familiar with, I wanted to talk about some of the buildings downtown. So of course, we all know this building today has the Blue Butterfly thrift store. Historically, it's the Masonic Temple, or most people here know it as Fisher's Department Store. So you can see an early photo of the building, as well as a current photo. Obviously, the situation around this building looks a little more dire today. I answered lots of questions about the bridge. Happy to do so again when I was talking to the students. But this, of course, is one of our keystone buildings in downtown Watertown, and I'm very grateful that so much work has been done in the past year to preserve this building with the decoupling of the bridge foundation from the foundation of this building. But as you can see, beautiful historic building. When I first moved to Watertown, I had heard people talk about Main Street had over time been raised an entire story. And it's not true. So there are a lot of instances where you can, like this building, for example, you can literally like see out windows, and you could have walked out a door at the front of this building because the river is carved back far enough that you could get out through the building. And if you walk around downtown, you'll see areas by the sidewalk that looks like a little like arched window hood in brick close to the sidewalk. At one point in time, all the buildings downtown had access from the sidewalks into the basements, whether it was a kind of a steep staircase going down or the wood or pavement was carved away to allow for a window, because every floor of these buildings was utilized. So you wanted that fresh air and that light to have access into your basement, and you also wanted access from the sidewalk if possible. So downtown, everything that you see that is the present day first floor was built as the first floor. There's another image. I know my teenagers like the Main Street Cafe, so you can see as it appears today. This building had a beautiful facade renovation done over the past couple of years. But check out this photo from December 18th, 1946. There's probably some people here who remember this fire when that occurred. So that terribly gutted both of these buildings, but fortunately the exterior was sound enough that it was able to be retained. But if you notice, do you see the swag garland hanging on the Christmas, or the Christmas garland hanging on the light pole? So here's a much different view of those buildings. The buildings that you can see kind of above the heads of the men working, that's 114 and 116 East Main Street. That's the present day address of Main Street Cafe, and then their attached annex. So this is how those buildings originally looked, probably around 1890. So there was it was just a design change, it was modernization. But around 1920 to 1930 downtown, several of our buildings were modified and they were clad in a darker brick. So Main Street Cafe building, the Brown Shoe building, Keck Furniture had its modifications then, and that was just the trend. Because as all these cool decorative elements began to rot away, they were never replaced because they were viewed as old-fashioned. But this picture shows the lane of the tracks for the interurban trolley, so I'm going to guess this is about 1908. So notice the tracks being laid, you can see all the bricks, and then over on the side you can see the horse and buggy. So another view, classic cinema, of course. This is probably, I think we had a student look up when the movie Gung Ho was in theaters, and I think it was around 1943. But there's kind of a neat view of our downtown, and of course Woolworths on the corner. Would be lovely to see that building with its big windows opened up again and seeing a retail use in there again. But what a great view of the downtown. The marquee does not exist anymore. We've often hoped and wondered if someone had that stored in a barn somewhere. It's never materialized, but the city did make a provision that for signage downtown, if we have a historic photograph to base a marquee sign off of, we can put them back, but that would probably be a little pricey. It's interesting too to look at these huge heavy signs and how they were mounted to the buildings and how much stress that must have put on those structures. So this is one of my very favorite stories to tell. Of course, this is the historic Schempf Brothers Department building at 207-209 East Main Street. So when I moved here in 2007, that's what the building looked like in the bottom corner. Pretty rough shape. And as I started to get more involved in historic preservation efforts here in town and with the city, there was actually discussion taking place about maybe that building needed to come down because its roof was shot, it was vacant, had an absentee landlord, had been for sale for a long time. And the city wanted to jumpstart some revitalization, and it said, what do we do when this is in the way? And the city did not have the means to take on a project like this. So there's this man named William Limborg, and he lives in California. He had never been to Watertown before. His mother passed away from dementia, and as she was declining, she went back to her childhood in Watertown. So she was born here. Her extended family is from this area, Lebanon, Hustisburg. But she is a descendant of the Schempf brothers. So the Schempf brothers department store is part of Bill's family. So it was her wish that her cremated remains, as well as Bill's father, be interred at Oak Hill Cemetery. So it must have been around end of 2013, really early 2014, that Bill came to Watertown for the first time. So he was intrigued by the city, made some connections with distant relatives he had not met before, and paid a lot of attention to this building sitting derelict on Main Street. So he saw it, he knew obviously it was part of his heritage, went back to California, maybe came back and saw it again, and in 2014 he made the decision to purchase it. So he probably paid about $80,000 for it and has put many times that into its restoration. But he'll say he bought it with his heart and not his head, which is sweet. But obviously, without Bill, where would this building be today? And Bill is involved in real estate and has some resources, and we are incredibly grateful for his philanthropy in Watertown. And he didn't stop there. He actually owns the Masonic Temple building now, and he's been a great partner in working with the city as we have navigated all these challenges. And he also is doing restoration work on the Brown Shoe building. He's been renovating apartments upstairs there, and he's made a lot of improvements to get that building in better shape than it was before. So of course, I have a historic picture of the building in the upper corner. People always ask me what's upstairs in the Schempp building. So of course, we know we have two great retail uses on the first floor, but the second and third floor are in a state called white boxed. So that means they are ready to go for the right use. So everything is just wide open. Of course, it's like 15-foot tall ceilings, the beautiful windows. But for when there is an appropriate use, Bill is ready to extend the electrical and the plumbing and even install a passenger elevator if it will make something happen on the upper floors of that building. There's a magnificent skylight on the third story that he has restored as well. But we're just so grateful for everything he has done to turn this building around and for the work he's doing on the other properties on Main Street. And he doesn't even live here. So this image actually is of the second floor of the Schempp Brothers department store building, probably taken between 1890 and 1900. And so you can see the cutout on the ceiling. That would have been accessed. Light from that huge skylight on the top floor would have illuminated the third story as well as that second story. And you can see the kerosene lamps, hanging kerosene lanterns. So they would have needed that daylight to push light into that space if you only have windows in the front and in the back of that building. Beautiful image, isn't it? And then I always like to show this photo too. We talk about a party in downtown Watertown. This is from 1909. This is when the interurban first made its appearance in Watertown. So you saw the picture earlier of the tracks being laid. So look closely, you will see a grid of wires going across the street that provided the electricity for the trolley. The two dots indicate locations. So the dot that you see on the, left, is Far Horizons Imports. And then the other one is the location of Latte de Nate today. I figured the students would all know Latte de Nate, especially because they like their coffee and their iced drinks. That at one time was the Wisconsin House. I don't know what happened to the Wisconsin House. Sometimes buildings burn, they fall apart, they just get razed. But today it is one of our coffee shops downtown. But incredible view of the street, and of course this is the 400 block of East Main Street. All those buildings still exist, just in various states of preservation. And in closing, this is a view of what our interurban trolley line looks like today. A wonderful project and asset for our community. I hope everyone here has had an opportunity to walk, bike, hike the trail. Really is incredible from Watertown right now.
I was just going to ask whatever happened to the old trolley, like the car and everything that's at Watertown.
Museum.
They're in a museum?
There's the interurban museum.
Okay, I'm not familiar with that. Is anyone here familiar with the interurban museum?
Montego,
In Mukwonago? Okay.
East Troy.
In East Troy, okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, that I'm not familiar with. Yeah, the old interurban hub, though, where the trains would be parked at night and stationed, is present-day Tire-rific.
Yep.
And who can tell us where the tracks ran in the city? Does anyone remember? Lyle?
Well, I don't remember.
You know!
I think they went up Western Avenue.
Okay.
To exit the city.
It's Western.
And I have an addendum to the previous pictures. I think that at one time, they used to light commercial buildings with acetylene gas. They'd have a acetylene tank somewhere in the basement, and then they would put in these pellets and add water, and it produced acetylene gas, the same gas that they use for torching metal. And they had to make sure that the ports were always closed, because if they weren't, there's a possibility the building can blow up. As a matter of fact, down in Farmington, the old tavern and hotel down there was blown up sometime around shortly after 1900. The bartender told one of the customers to go down in the basement and check because he thought the acetylene wasn't working. So the guy went down the basement, and of course, it had been leaking, and the basement was filled with gas, and he lit a match. So consequently, the hotel was lifted off its foundation and upset by about 6 or 8 inches. But they did use acetylene gas. And then there's another thing about Watertown. You see all these brick buildings. Well, Watertown used to have, I believe, 3 brickyards on the south end of town. And those ponds down there are the remnants of the old brick quarries, or the clay quarries. And all the bricks that came out of there were yellow. And if you go north just a few miles to Eustisburg, all the bricks that made up there were red because the different color of the clay. And another thing about the brick buildings, most of the commercial buildings are real brick buildings. They're solid brick walls with some stone. But the houses in Watertown, the majority of them are veneer brick. They're brick laid over a wooden frame building. And you can tell that by looking at the courses of the brick, because when they laid up a brick for a real brick building, they had to tie the brick together. So you'd have 5 rows of stretchers where bricks were laid in a line, and then you'd have a row of soldiers which connected the 2 brick layers inside and out.
Thank you. Anyone else have any questions or any insights to add?
Is that some kind of an animal head up on this upper right hand?
Yes, it looks, you are correct. That looks like an elk with antlers. Does everyone see what we're talking about?
Yeah.
And I never noticed that before. I wonder, it's hard to make out what that business is. I don't want to assume it's a tavern. We're gonna have to figure that out. So that would be, let's see, 413, I believe, is Far Horizons. Then 411, 409, 407, 407 and 405 are combined. Then Amato's is 403 and Literatus is 401. So who wants to be my guinea pig to figure out what the original use of that building is? If you do, let me know. Okay. I also work for the school district too, so I've got an in with these guys.
Well, thank you so much for coming, everybody. A couple reminders, there's plenty of food left on the table, so if you're feeling a little hungry, just feel free to grab some. Anybody who is interested in being an artist in our History Takes Flight Goose Project, you can meet me over there by the goose table, and we'll get you signed up for a goose that you can take home tonight. And the next event in this series is going to be November 19th, up at the high school, will be the grand unveiling of all of these Gosling Pride geese. So we hope to see you there. There'll be more refreshments and artists and student art. And you can see what these artists have come up with in the few short weeks between now and then. Yeah. And I know we've had a few more of our October artists show up as well. If anybody is here from the October art show, just give a little wave and be sure to check out their art on your way out of the library as well. Thank you so much for coming, and thanks to Melissa Lampe again for the wonderful presentation, and to all of you for your comments and questions too. That was fantastic. Thank you so much.